we need to work together, as you all know far more than I do, to do the journey. And in, I think, most cultures at the depth, there's the great journeys. Go back in European history of the Aeneid and Homer's writing of after Troy, people, the Greeks going west, colonizing Sicily and so on, and out into the Atlantic Ocean, what we now call the Atlantic Ocean. And I'm sure there's imagery in the Asian culture. I hate to pick out Mao Zedong, but the 1,000-mile walk, all of that is deep in our roots. And the high mountains on the west side and on the east side, and especially in the rainy season, everything is beautiful in the morning, and the hills have started to turn green, and there are falls coming down that are only there maybe 2 or 3 weeks a year during the rainy season. And it's just wonderful. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of rolling down a hill when the grass is high and the wildflowers are there, and giggling and laughing. It's just that sense of joy, because water gives life. And so maybe that's the joyful time in our lives. And then there are the deep, darkest valleys. Sometimes the deepest, darkest valley when we are hurt, or deepest, darkest valley when we're incarcerated, or the deepest, darkest valley when we're homeless, or when we don't have a job, or when we feel so alone we don't know whether life can be joyful. But the image here is the shepherd is God. And in that shepherd, what does he have in that deep, dark moment of the journey? He's got his staff, and the sheep can hear it, and they know they're not alone, we who are the sheep, and they have confidence that they can go forward. And even if they need a little help, what does he also have? He has the rod, can hit him in the rear end and say, no, you're not going that way, you're going this way. Don't run backwards. And then what happens? The sun starts to come out, and there's this beautiful refrain, and you can just hear and see the sun come out, and it brings light. And what do they see out in the desert? A meal for them in safety. Isn't that community? Isn't that the invite for people to come in community out of the darkness of fear, of being incarcerated, but also out of the darkness of anger and hatred deep in one's heart that's so closed can never begin to heal the wound. But we are welcome to come into the banquet of community that cares. And that's kind of a challenge for community to care and to share that banquet. And together then, live in the house of the Lord for all of our lives. But the journey together can bring us to the sun. And that sun that gives warmth and light. And maybe we can go back to the beginning. And in spring, roll down the hill, smell the wildflowers, and have a picnic. Because we've worked together with Lord and with the good thoughts of others.
Now, as I say, and as everybody who was at this launch event in Oakland a couple of weeks ago acknowledges, most of you all already knew this, right? A lot of research really is not rocket science. But important research on critical issues can do exactly what this report has done. And that's to make the experience of one group of people the topic of conversation among a much larger group of people. And hopefully that conversation then moves us forward to produce change. So another thing that research can do that I think is really important is to help people feel less isolated. Often we can learn through research that someone else had an experience that was similar to an experience we had, or that they felt the same way that we did when something happened to them. And so the third thing I want to share with you today is that if you are feeling like you're facing challenges with reentry, whether this is your own or someone else's reentry, you are not alone. More and more, the research is documenting that for the vast majority of people, reentry is hard work. The research tells us that all over the country, there are people who are finding that reentry brings a whole different set of challenges, its own challenges, and that whether that's their own reentry process or the process of a loved one or the process of a client. The research also does show us we can move forward, and it also gives us some ideas about what helps to do that. So for those of you who are returning to communities, you've already got one factor that is working totally in your favor. You are older than you used to be. So research consistently finds that age is an excellent predictor of recidivism, and the older we get, the less likely we are to return to jail and to prison. Education is another really strong predictor for recidivism. So if you are interested in and you're able to advance your education, whatever that might mean in your personal context, that's a great idea. Learning will take you many places in the freedom and the expansion of the mind. So please reach out for support where you can find it, whether this is from AA and NA sponsors, from your parole or your probation officer, from religious or spiritual guides, from service providers in this room today. A recent study showed us the staggering, but again, to those of us in this room, not unsurprising finding that out of every 4 adult American women, one of them has a family member who is currently in prison. Not currently in jail, not in prison in the last year. 1 out of 4 adult American women has a current family member in prison. Right here in the Bay Area, there's an organization called SE Justice Group that I'm affiliated with. We're building community around these issues for women, so please, again, reach out to me. I would love to connect you with them. But in general, just reach out, connect, get the help and the support that you need, because reentry affects you too. And finally, the research strongly shows that there's a lot about reentry success that falls on the shoulders of service providers, government officials, and other professionals. People need housing, medical care, a source of income, whether that's safe, legal employment or whether that's a government assistance program. They need to live in safe neighborhoods, to receive treatment for histories of trauma and for substance use, to be able to vote, to feel like they are valued members of society. So for all of you here today who are working in those areas, the research confirms that putting our energy into this is very worthwhile, and that what we are doing, welcoming people coming home, is critical.
I know firsthand the issues and challenges in our community, especially for young men of color. I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, in a single-parent home surrounded by poverty and violence. I used basketball as an outlet and focused on my studies to help escape these negative influences. My second oldest brother returned home after serving 8 years in prison. He returned home facing many barriers and challenges: housing, mental health, education, and he became overly stressed every day, not being able to help provide for his children and his families. During that same year, I was offered a pro contract to play basketball in Europe. So for me, 2009 was the highest point of my life. I accomplished 2 goals that I worked hard for: my education and basketball. But within a split second, 2009 became the lowest point in my life. As I was leaving a convenience store in my community, I was approached by 2 gentlemen with the intent of robbing me. After a brief scuffle, I became a victim of violence. I suffered 2 near-fatal gunshot wounds to my back. The bullets traveled through my spine, inches away from my spine, my aorta, dislocated my shoulder. I suffered 2 collapsed lungs and intense emotional and physical pain. We need to be better about how we think about victim services, reentry services, who they serve, and how well we serve them. Crime survivors want smarter investments in our justice system, especially towards prevention, recovery, and healing.
I'm born and raised in San Francisco, and the disparity that exists among African Americans is over the top, to me, at crisis levels. And there's not enough programs designed to help us. So I had to reach within and I'm a formerly incarcerated habitual, used to be, offender. And I played my part as a mother of 6 children. I have 6 children, I have 5 grandchildren. And I see how things went to hell early on when moms start walking away from their kids. That kind of like was the beginning of like mass incarceration. I think a lot of the youth that is involved with the system right now is the generation that I helped to create. So that's why I'm here.
My introduction to the criminal justice system started when I was 3 years old and my mother was arrested in the federal prison system, and that's when my family moved me to California to be able to be closer to her because she was arrested in Pennsylvania, and then served jail time in Chicago and then was moved here. And so my relationship to incarceration started off with moving around a lot, and also being very fortunate, unlike most children of incarcerated parents, to have people who are willing to move me to be closer to my mom. And so I grew up visiting her every weekend, and maintaining that relationship through incarceration. But I'm also come to this panel from experience in my professional development as the manager of Project What, which is a youth-led program for teens with incarcerated parents here in the Bay Area that I joined when I was in high school, and am very proud to be working at. And some of what I've seen so much through my work at Project What is how important reentry is and how few services are out there for youth to reunify with their family, with their parents when they're getting out, and how anxiety producing it can be, recognizing how much support I had and how hard it still was even when I had that support. And so I'm really excited to be here and hope that we can get a good discussion going with the audience today as well. Thank you for having us.
I can say what the impact incarceration has on a mother. It's a lot of guilt that comes along with going in and out of jail and not being there for your children, and it lasts a long time. It kind of deals. It weighs down on your self-esteem, and it doesn't matter how long you've been released. You still deal with the issues of what I did wrong. And I don't know if you spend a lot of time going in and out, you can't fix it. You know, it's like I have a son now who's a drug addict. Now, is that the impact of me? A lot of times it would be correlated back to me. I don't know what all it is. Sometimes the impact of incarceration, the same things that got to me might got to my kids, living in the hood, living in the projects. And so, it's, we try to talk about children of incarcerated parents, but it might not always be what the parent did. It might be what the environment did. Mm-hmm. So you can't really tell what happened. So I could just speak on another impact that limits how much they can eat for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. A lot of people want to be concerned with the children, but if you're not helping that mom feed them, then your program is non-existent. So I think that's the thing. We need to bridge the thoughts of children of incarcerated parents and look at the parent, I'm not knocking nobody, but I find that they think my kids are cute and don't like me.
And I think from the start, the biggest problem that we see is that when a person goes to prison, society is telling them that they are not worthy, and neither is their family anymore. It's a very dehumanizing situation, and it's disproportionately impacting communities of color and poor communities. And what that means is that people then get stereotyped and profiled as not worthy of jobs or getting housing or other services when they get out. So the system isn't set up to protect that family unit when a person is incarcerated. And that impact has a really heavy, damaging effect on children. When we're telling them that their parents aren't worthy, we're also telling them that they are not worthy. And so we see that a lot with cycles of children of incarcerated parents becoming more likely to be incarcerated is a really common theme that we hear a lot, and it happens sometimes and it doesn't happen other times. So I think that isolation piece of feeling like you don't have anywhere to go or anyone to talk to about that can be a root cause of a lot of trauma and other pain that happens. There's so much that happens that I've seen with the young people that I work with incarcerated parents.
For me, I think one of the things that as a child, when I was younger and my mom went away, like I said, she was in and out a lot basically throughout my whole life up until I was 21 when she was released. For me, it was the fact that was my family. It was just me and my mom. So when she was taken away, my family was taken away. My foundation, my ground, my home, my stability, all of that was stripped from me. And I think one of the things that sat with me through that is that nobody ever came to check on me. There was never, the police didn't come to check on the little girl. Social Security was never, nobody. I was just kind of left to fend for myself and figure it out. And I think that that's a problem that happens a lot when there's a single parent or when it's just, like it's just me and my mom. It's just us two. And so for me, what happened is I had to figure out how to be an adult in the 6th grade. I had to figure out how to be the big kid and how to survive. It kind of seems like in certain aspects the children are completely forgotten about. And I think that I just got very lucky in being a very resourceful individual. But I think a lot of it just comes with sometimes there's not enough attention and sometimes there's too much attention. I feel like there needs to be a balance somewhere in that.
So you're incarcerated, waiting for your trial to come up, waiting for your charge, waiting because you don't have the resources to get out on your own recognizance. So you're inside and the debt is growing. So what we do in San Francisco, we send a team inside to speak with you, the parent, to say, let's follow the answer, let's stop the debt from growing. That's the first thing we need to do. So what we do is we go inside, I send a team, I send attorneys, I send caseworkers. We go in and we file the answers so that the debt stops growing. That's the first thing we do. We have worked inside the county jail. We've identified over 3,000 parents incarcerated over the last 4 years, and they owe a total of $21 million. Who got that? I don't.
Neither did they get that.
Exactly. Okay. How much of that $21 million is owed to the family, the children, right? That's what we're here for, right? That's what the program's here for. Very small amount.
Owed to the county.
But not only that, when he finally get that money and it's taken out of that first check, and it doesn't go to his family. The family didn't get it.
Wow.
Why is that? Because the law says you gotta pay it back. And the first $50, so if he pays that $200 and he got that money together and paid it, she's only gonna see $50 of it. So I took a lot of time here to say that what happens is the debt grows and it impacts the family because it keeps that family in poverty. It keeps that family financially insecure and food insecure. So programs need to think differently. Programs need to catch up to where people are today. We have all this technology. We need to catch up. And we need to move faster in change.
Right.
So we can keep up with what people need today. Parents, adults, children. How can we take care of our babies? We are trying to catch up to where people are, families are today. And that, we believe, will make the difference in helping to work with a family who is trying to lift themselves up, and how we can support those parents so that they can lift their children up.
Some of the gaps that I feel as far as like when it comes to reentry is that there's not always enough time to try to rebuild the relationship between the parent and the child before they're actually released. So like I said, my mom was in Nevada and she got moved around a lot. I never really knew when she was getting moved around or where she would be next. She finally had got moved to Auburn, so that was kind of closer for me than Nevada. I could drive there a couple times a month, but that was our first time talking in years, and it was through glass. So I would sit down in Project What, and I need questions. What do I say to her? How do I have this conversation with her? Because if I would have been able to visit my mom in that jail and sit down face to face with her and next to her and hug her and have a conversation with her, I want people to know how much of a difference that makes than sitting through this piece of glass trying to talk to her and feeling no connection. My mom died last month, and they were still there for me through that. Even me not being in the program anymore, or me not being there like all the time like I used to be, they still came to her funeral. They came there to support me, and for me that was a big deal. I feel like as children of incarcerated parents, we're used to people leaving, whether or not it's to incarceration or it's because we're losing them. I grew up in East Oakland and then in Richmond, where we lose people all the time. We lose everybody we love. And so to see that these people that I had grown so close to stuck around. It's a lot. It means a lot. And it introduced me to so much stuff, and it gave me faith that not everybody's gonna leave. And I think for me, that was a big thing, because I think that was always something that I expressed in Project what happens if she leaves? What happens if I get her back and then I lose her? And so having that to fall back on was a big deal. In that moment, to still have that support, it meant the world, because like I said, for me as an individual, I'm used to people leaving. I'm used to them, I'll be here, I'll be around, and then them not going, whether or not it was by choice or not by choice. And so I think that finding a program or a place where you know that they'll always be around, that they'll still be there, is a big deal, especially for the child, because we question that in everybody and not feeling like I was the only one anymore. But I feel like that consistent support and that consistent, hey, we're here, was a big deal, because like I said, it's just not something that I was used to. So it meant a lot.
In terms of mental illness in the jail, I think, it's become very clear, certainly in the media, that we're at sort of a crisis point, that jails and prisons are inundated with mentally ill people. And I think what's interesting is that, so much attention has come about due to people with mental illness in the jail, but the reality is that the jail population and the prison population is disproportionately affected by mental illness, by substance use disorders, and by medical conditions. So chronic illnesses, the huge array of issues that contribute to mass incarceration, and don't agree with those. But my focus and my job is to make sure that when I have a patient in jail, that they're getting the best care possible, that we're doing everything we can to make them healthier. So not just mental health treatment, but medical care. So for example, so often those two are intertwined, and I don't think that there's as much dialogue about that as there is about the co-occurring substance use disorder and mental illness. So lately I've been dealing with a lot of people that, due to their mental illness, they're paranoid about getting their medical issues treated. So they have untreated eye infections or an STD, or they have issues with incontinence. But a big issue the counties are dealing with now is that people that are found incompetent to stand trial on felony charges go to the state hospital. If the state hospital deems that they're unlikely to be restored, historically they would conserve them at the state hospital, and they would transition from a forensic unit to a civilian unit. They're now sending these people back to jail.
And in San Francisco, when we all got together and we talked about what are we going to do to really help folks, the mentally ill who are cycling through our jails, the one thing everybody agreed on immediately was housing. Is that it is so hard to work with this population if you can't have them inside. To expect them to make appointments, to follow through with their court, if they're on the street or doing the shelter shuffle, it's a recipe for disaster. So we have a very robust mental health court in San Francisco, the behavioral health court, and it does a great job. And I think one of the things that I've always been proudest about is that it really works with people who are looking at prison. That it's the kind of deep end folks. It's the folks that have serious charges, and that they're gonna take these resources and really have a huge impact on this person's life.
I believe in community treatment. I know what our jails have done statewide and nationally. We warehouse people. We force the resources to be spent by the jails, and the jails are really not in a position to command any interest in doing community things. I have been arguing for years that you can't run mental health services in a jail with 1.5 psychiatrists and no staff. And so that is why I have fought so hard to get people out of the jail, because they just simply, we have no facilities. The doctor is in a storage closet. I mean, seriously, this is not how you should be doing things. You have to make decisions about priorities. And to me, there is no justice unless it's equal. And equal justice never exists when you treat one group of people differently. And that's what we do with the mentally ill. And we really need to change the entire system. You know, it is the church that steps forward, all the different religions. You know, we have a faith-based collaborative, and they are constantly pressing these issues.
Proud to be here, and I'm proud to be a part of the Insight Prison Project. I've been on the board since 2010. I was released in early 2010 after serving almost 23 and a half years for second-degree murder. The Victim Offender Education Group, one of the things that I think is really powerful about it is most people in prison don't talk about their crime. And at the same time, working on all kinds of different aspects so that people understand not only what they did, but the impact of that. To be able to have empathy and understand what the victims went through. That impact goes beyond the immediate impact. The life being lost, being incarcerated. It goes far beyond that. How do we deal with that? Because punishment is needed. People need to be accountable for what has happened. And at the same time, how do we bring people to have that accountability, but also how do we bring them back into society where they're able to interact with the rest of society, not create more harm, but to be able to contribute. And that's what we're about.
I have 3 roles that I wanted to share with all of you today. The first, as a secondary victim, which we don't hear a lot of stories about. The second is as a loved one of, at one point, an incarcerated person, today as a formerly incarcerated person. And the third, as the role of a victim offender education group facilitator. When I was initially interested in becoming a facilitator, one of my mentors said, "Owie, no, you're not ready." Not ready, what does that mean? So if I can rewind a little bit to that first role as the secondary victim, I was present that day that my now husband committed his crime. And as a 16-year-old, I didn't realize what the impact of my being there moments after the actual occurrence had on my life. At the time, the adults didn't know how to deal with that kind of event on a high school campus. And so very quickly, the young people were urged to just move on with your life. Today, I can tell you that many of my classmates that were there during that period of time and throughout those 4 years, and I can still get responses from former classmates who are now adults, raising their own children, wondering, how do I raise my son? How have I not been able to get rid of this anger that I feel, this loss of my friend? So the ripple effect of being a secondary victim without community support or ways for people to understand how to help us through continues on decades later. But on the other side of that wall is where I learned words like restorative justice, where I learned words about harm, where I actually learned about accountability and what that looked like being modeled for me, sitting next to the person I loved, teaching me about the programs he was learning on the inside. And it was apparent to me that this was a program and these are tools that I wondered why people on the outside, free people, are not getting this same kind of training. That's what inspires me in the work that the Inside Prison Project does with the Victim Offender Education Group.
And at no point, there's no really dialogue about what I had done, the consequences of what I had done to other people, and sort of taking responsibility for the crime itself. It was more about focusing on, I did something wrong and I'm being punished. And at 17 years old, I was tried as an adult for a violent crime. And I was in a juvenile facility going to adult court. And as a juvenile in adult court, you're sort of sheltered in some ways, but also being left in the blind in some ways, because you don't really understand the proceedings that's going on as an adult, because they don't think you'll understand it anyway. And so you sort of just go along with the process. But there's no real work in dialogue with the victims and the perpetrator in order to try to come and find the truth about what happened, and having those who have committed a crime to understand the totality or the impact of that crime. And so that's where Inside Prison Project, I think, contributed to, right? As a juvenile, being able to verbalize, being able to understand fully the impact of my crime on the community, on the individuals who have committed the crime on personally, to their families, to their neighbors, to their friends. None of that I could sort of verbalize or understand as a juvenile, as a kid.
When I was 15, my stepfather was a police officer who was killed in the line of duty. And when I was telling these men about this, there was such understanding and compassion given back to me by everyone in the room. Everyone came to shake my hand and say how much I had helped them. And while I don't know exactly how I helped them, because we don't get too much of a discussion to talk about things one-on-one, I know that there was a severe impact just based on me going and speaking to them that one time. And it's a different kind of feeling, being able to help someone just by saying that you understand, and that, while I have suffered all these problems, I was lucky enough to get the help that I needed in my life, and so I grew up and was able to be a productive member of society. But thinking back in my childhood, I can pinpoint the exact moments where everything could have turned badly if I hadn't had help. And I realize now that just because I was lucky enough to be able to talk to people and have that the support in my life, not a lot of people have that at all.
One other point that I wanted to bring up, Josh, when he was talked about being able to pinpoint the different violence that he's seen in his life. And that's one of the first things that people in our program have to do. Right off the bat, they have to talk about their crime impact statement. But after that, we go into what was the earliest violence you've seen? And we ask them to do a timeline, to think about what that violence was and what impact that violence had on them, because that really helps them to get a better understanding of their childhood, of the violence that they've seen, of the way they started changing. And I've seen tremendous changes in people when they've had that opportunity to wake up.
There's a really beautiful quote on, I think, one of these handouts. And I think he says something along the lines of, in order for a caterpillar to transform into a butterfly, he needs a space, he needs a place to evolve. And that's what this program offers, is that safe place. And I know that, it's otherwise in prisons, it's hard to find that place.
So those are the individuals that we have contact with. They're the ones telling us how hard it is out in society, how difficult, how so many challenges out there, to the point to where I'm scared to go out, right? So what's missing there is the 30% that are succeeding, right? Because they're not allowed to come back in and talk to individuals that are preparing. What is missing in juvenile facilities is men, women to model, right, these behaviors, to tell them, like, make connections with them emotionally, the consequences of the crimes that they have committed. But to hear a story of someone who had committed a crime, been punished, and not glamorize prison, but tell it as it is, how lonely it is, how separation from their families, from their loved ones, the impact on the victims, the survivors of children, and what they have gone through because of crime. This is missing because, again, the 30% are not being allowed to go into schools, they're not being allowed to go back into prisons and sort of tell that story. So all we hear is the horror stories, 65% who couldn't make it, and then you're like terrified to sort of go out there and face these things. So,
and for the pilot specifically, we were lucky that, I don't know about lucky or it was by design, that there were judges in juvenile court that really led the efforts on the juvenile hall side to get the pilot going in concert with IPP. So for me, having institutional support with judges that see the young people in their courts was important. The other piece to that, especially in session, the curriculum allows this progression of dialogue and teaching vocabulary about fear, about joy, happiness, identifying feelings, and walking you through that timeline of your first time when you recall experiencing violence. That even if we don't ask them, the curriculum allows that young person, as they get more insight, that they'll share eventually.
They're dying to share.
And with more understanding about what they're saying. Now, I can't say as a juvenile they'll know everything, they'll have full, complete insight, but and because it's also a selection process for the young people, that they have to say, I want to be here. Now, I had a young person that said, well, even if I go, even if I participate, what's going to change? I might change how I think. I might know more about myself. And then he looks at me and says, Mrs. Rubio, I'm still going to have to look over my shoulder. So why should I do this? And I said, well, you need to give it a try. I can't answer that for you. And so those young people in my particular group had to struggle with, okay, how much do I say? Is this person going to tell somebody else? But they made it through. Not without challenge, but they made it through.
So my program is simple. We try to prevent drug overdose deaths, which is the leading cause of death for people leaving jail and prison, especially in the first 2 weeks. And many harm reduction programs are about engaging with people in a time in their lives when they are not yet ready for recovery or haven't chosen recovery for themselves yet, but we believe that people are still human beings and are deserving of and need engagement in services. And so that's sort of the perspective that we come from, is that recovery can't be forced on someone, it can't be mandated, it can't be coercive. It is a path that people find themselves on when they're ready. So we hope to help people stay alive until they're ready.
And I think they need sort of wraparound services and intensive case management that has not been offered to them. For whatever reason, lack of funding, the fact that the prison and jail system doesn't have appropriate service for the mentally ill. So I think with the right kind of support, people can recover, but that support, one is going to look very different for each individual. I do very individualized treatment planning, and initially, you have to build rapport, you have to build a relationship with the client, and really get to know them and find out what their goals and their needs are, and after that, build a collaborative treatment plan. But I mean, really, I truly believe that, a community, working as a community, we can heal people that have been traumatized by whatever, social injustice they've gone through, whether it's prison or, domestic violence or whatever. But it's going to require a team of people. It's going to require people from the community, family, friends, providers, people in the legal system, and people in prisons to really help people recover.
I believe the exposure that I had as a kid, the mentors, and all the people that came across in my life, sitting incarcerated in San Quentin, all those people came back to my mind, and I thought about the officer, the first arresting officer that I ever had, became a mentor of mine. And he wasn't an African-American male. He took me to my first baseball game, football game, which was huge. I mean, I've never gone to a baseball game or a football game. And a lot of the youth in our communities, they don't have that same exposure. The only exposure they're getting is of negativity. So the abnormal behavior that we know to be abnormal becomes a norm. So then how do we mobilize into the community and bring these resources to the community?
And so I guess recovery, for me, it's a strange frame for my exact work, but looks like addressing those stressors when people get out, and also really pushing the systems to implement real evidence-based programs on the inside. And for reentry, the things that we know reduce people's chance of overdosing when they get out, that's access to medication-assisted treatment.
The initial thing that we have to do is connect clients to get their basic needs, housing, income, create a daily structure, help them focus on high-risk behaviors, which they often engage in.
But a lot of the resources that's needed is really in the trenches. It's how do we mobilize these resources that we have and bring them into the trenches, right? So how do we mobilize all the services that are around us to bring them into the community and have like little hubs, right? Like little substations where we have mental health in the developments, where we have job readiness training, personal development, all these different things that are like at the CAS Center. How do we mobilize them and bring them into the developments so that these young people can start to begin to get the exposure, begin to understand the different things that they need to understand? And that's a huge need. Like that's a right now need from what I've noticed is bringing it into the community. Thank you.
So to me, harm reduction, I've been working in the harm reduction world for over 15 years, and to me it means a lot of things. It means the work that we do with people on an individual basis, which means approaching people without judgment and meeting them where they're at instead of imposing our own sort of ideas and values upon what their path is. It also is about community. It is also about making sure that people have access to the resources that are well matched with who they are and what they need. But then also on an institutional and a policy level, harm reduction is about making changes in how we handle certain things. And so if this panel is about drugs, then the number one thing is that we should not be incarcerating people for being drug users and having mental health issues.
The most important thing for me is FaceTime with a client. And if I'm not engaging with a client, then I'm not doing anything. And it's important to meet with a client, meet where they're at, talk about what their strengths are, talk about what resources are available in the community so that they can change, so they can turn things around. And I think that's what's really important to me is overall is reducing risk and keeping clients out of custody and reducing recidivism.
Harm reduction to me is, I've seen our partners come up with different definitions of harm reduction. Some people's turning their back on the client and saying, okay, I'm giving him housing, but it's okay to use. So the guy has temporary housing and he's still using drugs. Others, harm reduction is making whatever's necessary so he can move forward and be successful and address his addiction. Sometimes that may include, I said it earlier, tough love.
It starts when you leave your door, right? So when you walk out the door, and if you represent a huge agency, that's when your work starts. And I think holding them accountable, because when you build your relationship with your clients, you'll know if they're ready, right? If they're inconsistent, they're not showing up, I can't place you, and being honest, letting them know, look, I can't even place you because you're not even being consistent with me, right? So now how do I train you to get to that next level, right? So what I did was I got 35 young people from all over the Western Addition and had pop-up meetings, had pop-up sessions around personal development. I want everyone to come in a suit and tie. And if you don't show up in a suit and tie, you have to leave. We ended up with 15 consistent people, and those were the people who were actually ready for employment. So I think that having innovative ways on how you pick the ones that are ready, because they'll always tell you that they're ready. No matter what, I'm ready.
You have to call and kind of be a dick sometimes to some of these other providers, because you got to get a client in the door, and people no, and it's like if you say the right thing and you really push, you can get someone services, but it leads to burnout. It's very difficult as a provider, and there's definitely lack of funding. And I think that the medication component is it's so right now my program, the citywide probation team, as opposed to citywide proper, does not have medication support. So I'm having to connect clients to other providers in the community to get psych meds. And they have to show up 5 times at other centers before they even see a psychiatrist. And sometimes I can't get the client to leave their SRO or whatever reason. It is ridiculous, And Westside right now is the only place I think is offering day of medication support. So yeah, that's something that needs to change.
My name is Deprise Bonilla. I'm 23 years old. I was raised in Colombia and came out here when I was about 8 years old to my parents' house. I didn't get along with them. I started hanging out, game banging, and as time went on, I just started getting in trouble, got incarcerated about 3 times, and that's how I ended up in the system. After I got out when I was 17, I went to a foster home, a transitional housing actually, here in Daly City, where I still didn't learn my lesson. I didn't really think that the system really helped me learn anything. I didn't really care at the time. It ended up helping me actually get away from bad influences and trying to do good was my son. I ended up getting pregnant at 17 with my first baby, and my ex-boyfriend got deported. The system, I feel like, betrayed me. I ended up finishing my program after being incarcerated 2 years, and they told me that if I graduated from high school on time with my class, because I had to go to high school because I was on probation, that they would kick me out of the transitional home, and in less than a month, they knew I was pregnant. And if I stayed and I didn't graduate with my school on time for high school, then practically become a dropout, right? That they would let me stay in the program for a whole nother year, and they would help me raise my son for that year until I became stable. I thought they were joking. I decided to graduate with my class on time, and I ended up having my son. And before I had my son, I graduated on time, and before the 30 days were up, they gave me a notice saying you have 30 days to leave. So I was actually 7 months pregnant with my first son, and I was homeless.
Hello, my name is Renata Benitez. I am from Oakland, California. I'm 18 years old. I was raised here in the Bay Area. I'm going to school here in San Francisco. I go to Five Keys Charter School. I met Comunidad San Dimas when I was 5 months pregnant in jail. They were willing to help me out with my son and with my education, and they gave me a grant for 4 years. So throughout high school, I'm gonna have their help, and hopefully throughout college as well. The greatest challenge I'm facing right now is to finish high school, because I have a 1-year-old baby, and I have another one on the way. And I'm gonna try to see how I'm gonna do that, but like continue with my education with 2 kids and working. That's gonna be a challenge for me. What influenced me to break the cycle was back in 2013 when they told me I was pregnant with my son, with my first son. That's what really made me change my way of thinking. Since the last time I was pregnant in jail with him. And it was something that I had done a year or 2 ago that caused me to be in there pregnant because of a warrant that was out for 2 years. And that really made me think about, like, dang, do I really want to be in here again with my son born and me in here losing him growing up, you know? That was something I didn't want. I feel like if they were more supportive with the girls, they're a little more sensitive, I would say. They need, like, I don't know, how can I explain? They have sometimes like broken families and like all this stuff, or they're like single mothers or something, and they don't have help. Like, I feel like what would be nice is like if they had counseling or like support groups when they got out. Yeah, they treated us really bad. They were really mean. I remember when I was pregnant in there, they would. I remember when I was in there, they made me like do everything by myself, like carry all the heavy trays by myself with no help from the sheriffs, nobody. Like, I would have to serve 30 plates for like the girls. Because one time, one sheriff got mad at me, and he had the other girl that was the other helper to not help me. He told her, "Oh, come here, I need to talk to you." And he made me do everything by myself, pregnant, carry all the heavy stuff. That made me hecka mad. I got locked up in 2012, and that's where I met Renata.
I would tell them first and foremost, know who your friends are in life, because that has a lot to do with where you may end up next. Because I had some friends in my life, and they weren't my friends. They actually weren't there when I was incarcerated. Only people I had were my parents.
I've learned a lot from my mistakes, but I also think sometimes friends look bad and sometimes they're really not, and then sometimes the ones that are bad, don't look bad. So when I talk to the younger ones, sometimes they don't want to hear, "Oh, choose your friends wise," like they're young, they're in that age. But I know in the district, sadly, we can't talk about faith, we can't talk about God, which I think that should be, we could talk about other things that we shouldn't be talking about, like, but we can't talk about God. And I feel like when we do have the opportunity to talk to the young ones around us, I think faith is a very big point. Like, for me, God is everything. Letting a kid know how important it is to, okay, this is what you're doing right now, but later on, what do you want to be when you grow up? And helping that kid become that, and supporting him, even if he does bad, pick him back up, and be there for him. I did bad. Julio was there for me still, and they were like, it's okay, do it again, try it again. Not giving up on that kid, regardless of how they think right now. That's not how they're going to think in 10 years.
About the bad things that were going on, but we also talked about solutions to those problems, and they gave us things to do that would help us with the problems that we were facing. And so, of course, it's like put God first, but if you can't bring God into the school, definitely put other choices first, put positive outlets first, give them things that will help them be better and do better. Even in your class alone, like, you can do things in your class like show them the cycle of violence and the pathway to healing, and like those super basic things that give them something to think about when they're thinking about doing something bad or when things are going on. Just having those outlets and having those tools are definitely like the key to any child's like success or happiness. juvenile hall was like very emotional for me. I called my grandmother. She was like, I can be dead when you get out, and I literally cried all night long to the point where they had to like open my door and see was I okay. And then of course, I mean, number one, being a mother, like, but my daughter is only 2. I went to juvenile hall when I was 16, so you know, I had her when I was 21. So all of those years of doing positive things, like, and then here she comes, and I'm like, oh, you can't bake it Noah's bagels for the rest of your life. So it took me a while. I mean, and then like when she was 6 months, Urban Peace moved and hired me, so I went from $9 to $18 an hour, and that changed, and knowing that $18 an hour still is not going to get you where you want to be. And then I was like, oh, I'm gonna go for human studies and African American studies and this study and that study, and then I was like, but you're always helping people out. Like, people call me when they have problems, so I'm like already kind of like a psychologist without the degree. So knowing that I don't like jail, I can't finish psychology in jail, keeps me out of jail, and knowing that I cannot be the city council nor the mayor in jail keeps me out of jail, because the things that I want to do, jail is like, I'm going this way, and jail would shoot me this way, like really, really far. Though it's easy, like my grandma said, it's easy. Trouble is easy to get into, so very hard to get out of. So I got to stay out of trouble because I want to do things with my life. Jail is not going to help me.
Ophelia Williams. I am the executive director at the Center for Young Women's Development, where we have changed our name to Young Women's Freedom Center. I can honestly say I've had the privilege of working with everyone up here on the panel and being at the conference last year. So this is a returning space for me. And so I appreciate Julio for continuing to create spaces like this where we can get uncomfortable and very real all at the same time. This is an issue. Reentry is an issue because it was designed to be an issue. It was never designed for us to actually have people come out of incarceration and successfully reintegrate back into their communities to successfully change them. So unfortunately, we are fighting an uphill battle. So I don't always say what's politically correct, but I'm gonna say what's real. And I just want us to get real deep real quick. And reflect on what Oswald said about Proposition 47. It was for low-level, non-violent felony offenses under $950. But we have a negative narrative coming from law enforcement and whoever else saying that this has driven up crime. Low-level, non-violent felony offenses under $950 is really tearing apart our communities? Really? It's like, and you want us to believe it? And these offenses, historically, were what they called wobblers. So it was up to the judge to determine if they were a felony or a misdemeanor anyway. All we did is say, no, you cannot call them a felony anymore. That's all we did. And they are so angry about that small shift that the people said they wanted. The voters said they wanted it, and that's why that is now law, is we meet young women where they are at. So yes, we are in lockup. Reentry starts before you ever step foot outside of those walls. That's where you have to make the first point of contact. You have to step into a locked facility where they are housing our family and our friends, and you gotta talk to them. You got to look them in their eye. You got to get real close to them. And it may make you uncomfortable at first, but if you're serious about reentry, that's where it starts. And then they're comfortable coming out and coming to your place and getting that source of support they need. Unfortunately, you know, they're in restricted environments. They're in controlled environments when they are incarcerated, and when they are released, that control doesn't exist out here in the world. That everything, you get everything thrown at you. Things have changed. I mean, freaking now it's an iPhone 6S. I just got the iPhone 6 Plus, and now it's already a new iPhone. So imagine we're dealing with populations on the inside where things are not changing. It's still old as hell, decrepit, and sterile. Out here in society, things are evolving so quickly, and we just expect them to jump right out here and figure it out. So in all fairness, you know, it's like we have to really become sort of a one-stop shop of referral. We don't have to do everything, but we do need to kind of know how to help them navigate, and they won't always ask for help, and that's okay too. We got to wrap them with that support, and it will be uncomfortable, you know, but it's okay. And I love how the theme of this day has been community. And I love when I can come into a space and be real about my faith, because I love God. And that is how I lead. I lead with love. And it is because of that love and that compassion I'm able to be transparent and real with my communities. But I too have been directly impacted by crime and violence and incarceration. And it's not many of us who sit up here of color and have not been.